Welcome, everyone. We'll get started here in just a moment as all the attendees are joining the webinar. So give us just a moment and we'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Healthcare Innovation Panel sponsored by Microsoft and HiSig. Today is Tuesday, April 6th. It's just after 3:15 p.m. and we're ready to get started with our panel. A few items to cover before we begin. A couple of housekeeping items. So make sure that your microphone and video, they're automatically disabled. Only the host and panelists and the presentation should be visible for you. You can use the chat button for comments or issues that arise during the webinar. You can also use our Q&A button for questions to the panel. We'd ask that you provide all of your questions via the Q&A feature, as some of the questions that are not answered during the panel discussion may be answered at a later date. So the Q&A button is the best way for us to keep track of those. Be open-minded, have fun, have your questions ready. Understand that today's webinar is being recorded. So all the chats, all the Q&A elements are all going to be contained in the record for folks to see later on. So with that, I'll get started with the introduction of myself, Theodore Nicholson, the treasurer for the National Society of Black Engineers Healthcare Innovation Special Interest Group, or HiSig. And I will talk a little bit about what HiSig is doing in 2021, some of the things we've done in the past, and try to quickly move into an introduction to Microsoft, as well as get into the Q&A with the panel. So let's get started. So HiSig has a vision to become to be the most trusted ecosystem for technical expertise and solutions to complex healthcare problems that impact the Black community. We do that by working toward our mission, which is development and implementation of innovations that improve the diagnosis, treatment, the prevention of injury, illness, and disease. And there's multiple ways in which we do that across several different areas within the healthcare innovation space. So our strategy to enact or to accomplish that mission is the CARE strategy. We are connecting our membership across multiple different areas and across multiple different member types. We also work to advance healthcare innovations through R&D and commercialization activities. We work with organizations to recruit and retain engineering talent that's typically underrepresented in healthcare innovation. And we educate as well as expose our members to innovations that help secure or close gaps within the Black community specific to healthcare disparities. So you can see this infographic showing our growth since our inception in 2016. And I'm going to move to our one of our key elements, which is building ecosystems that partner academic institutions, industry sponsors and leaders, as well as members of the community and members of NSBE in order to do the things that I just mentioned, which include healthcare innovation activities geared toward closing the gaps for the Black community in healthcare. We've already begun with some of our regional sites in RTP, Atlanta, Boston, and elsewhere. And we're expanding in 2021 to some of the key locations that you see here on this map. And with that, I'll turn it over to Wadud Daoud from Microsoft, and he'll give you an intro to their organization and what they're doing as far as working with NSBE and their commitment to healthcare.
Thank you for that introduction, Dr. Theo. It's really awesome to be able to see the strategy kind of come to light. I'm here. My name is Abdul Wadud Daoud. I'm a program manager at Microsoft, and I'm here to really give a short story around who we are at Microsoft, what we do at Microsoft, but also a little bit about where we've come from. And the way I like to explain that is by going to convention last time that we had in person in Detroit, where I was able to have the opportunity to give a personal tour to Rajesh Jha, who is an executive vice president at Microsoft. And I remember vividly walking through the convention center and ending out our tour downstairs at the PCI area, or the pre-college initiative area, and Rajesh Jha walking away saying, I'm, quote, leaving inspired. That was about a month into my time at Microsoft. And what really changed from that point on was taking the partnership between Microsoft and NSBE and turning it from something that was super transactional historically to being really transformational. And so to this date, or to date, since that moment, you know, Microsoft has actually empowered NSBE to start their digital transformation through a multi-year effort that's powered through Microsoft, Azure, and our other offerings. We've also been able to take all fall regional conferences from being hosted on Zoom to being hosted on Microsoft Teams. And this is really just the tip of the iceberg, but it's organizations like the Healthcare and Life Sciences group that you'll be speaking to today that really embrace and embody what we mean when we say taking this partnership from being transactional to being transformational. So if you go to the next slide, actually 2 slides from here, I think. So I'll touch on the mission because I think it's really important for us to be grounded in this. And this is the reason that I came to Microsoft. Overall, our mission is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And when you zoom in a little bit lower and look specifically at that US Health and Life Sciences mission, it's to empower our customers and partners to make health and care personal, effective, and affordable. And if we go to the next slide, we'll give a really broad viewpoint of Microsoft all up, and then I'll pass it over to Tiffany, who's going to dive a little bit deeper into the Healthcare and Life Sciences organization, and then we'll go into the actual Q&A. And so at the highest level, you see our mission there. There's a really high level worldview that we have as an organization, and that is an intelligent cloud and intelligent edge. Intelligent cloud and edge you can think of as the closer that you can get touching that technology. The solution areas are shown there. And as you can see, if you are somebody who's interested in Microsoft, you can connect across multiple domains, whether that be healthcare, gaming, search, modern life, et cetera. And then lastly, and this is something that's really important to me, is the culture, a growth mindset where we're not worried about where we're at today, but where we're going to be on our journey and where we can grow up. The values that we have, the expectations we have as managers, and then also principles in leadership around creating clarity and making sure that there's energy in the room. And so that's a really high level view of when we came to this partnership a couple of years ago, and it was very transactional, looking to just hire Black talent, to now it's really leaning in and getting different teams and organizations within Microsoft to try to support the NSBE family. And this event is one of those where you'll be able to hear some really great perspectives from the HLS group. With that, we can go to the next slide and I'll pass it over to Ms. Tiffany Shaw to be able to give a deeper view into healthcare. I'm like, oh, not yet. I want to give you a little bit more about our commitment to diversity. This is another reason that I came to Microsoft. You know, I never wanted to be a part of an organization that just talked about diversity. I wanted to be a part of an organization that was about diversity. And this kind of shows that. This is taken from an email that Satya Nadella, our CEO, sent to the entire company, where there was 2 specific tidbits that I felt resonated a lot with the NSBE community. The first one says, we will double the number of Black and African-American people managers, senior individual contributors, and senior leaders in the United States by 2025. We at NSBE know we have goals of graduating 10K Black engineers annually by 2025. And this is a great kind of showing of what Microsoft is doing internally to commit to diversity. The second part is expanding our leadership development programs for select Black and African-American mid-level employees and their managers. So really the story here is to make sure that if you're even slightly interested in Microsoft as a company, realize that we're not just talking about diversity, we're empowered to be about diversity. Now, I will transition it over to Ms. Tiffany Shaw to give a little deeper view of the healthcare and life sciences org at Microsoft.
Thank you, Adud. That's right. Don't talk about it, let's be about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
What we can see here, this slide is not only just an overview of Microsoft's presence and commitment to health, but really shows, our proven track record in the space, right? So if you look down at the bottom right corner, when you look at the details, at the data, it's hard to deny Microsoft is quite frankly, the most trusted cloud out there, with 98% of the Fortune 500 using Microsoft Cloud services. We look at that through a healthcare angle. There are 25,000 organizations in just the US alone who also entrust Microsoft with their most sensitive data. So we're proud to be working together to address some of the most pressing issues and topics that we see across the entire health landscape, including, what we see a lot in the news around data breaches, which results in over $6 billion lost to data breaches every single year. Another huge focus area for us that is very important to the Microsoft mission is around social equity and health equity. So on the left side, you'll see we've invested over $165 million in our AI for Good initiative, which really focuses on bringing resources and technology to organizations that are focused on improving and solving humanitarian issues across the entire globe. So some of the focus areas there are on the planet, on accessibility, on health, and other humanitarian issues that we see in different communities. We're also proud last year when COVID hit to shift a lot of our focus to digital skilling as everything shifted to sort of this virtual world, to make sure that we were giving more people an opportunity to compete in this sort of new world that we're all living in. And also sort of in that same vein, how we could help close that gap in terms of infrastructure for access with broadband. So we're very proud to be offering airband for our rural access initiative as well. So basically what you see here is a lot of Microsoft's commitment to the overall space, again, with over 2,000 employees specifically dedicated to this space and over 35 years in the industry.
Love it. And Dr. Theo, I'll probably hand things off to you. If we go to the next slide, I think you'll get a view of the different panelists that we'll have speaking today. What I will say is, while we get into the questions, when somebody from the Microsoft side answers your first question, feel free to give a really quick intro into your role at Microsoft, what you do, and we'll go from there. So with that, thank you, everyone. Super excited for this conversation. And we'll kick it off to you, Dr. Theo, to go with the first question.
Thank you, Wadud. You can see the panelists here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you all can see the panelists, and I'll go right into the questions. They'll be open-ended from us for now. And again, I'd like to remind folks that if you have questions for the panelists, please utilize the Q&A tool. That way they can see them ahead of time, and also we'll be able to facilitate it more quickly to get your questions answered later on in the program. So, with that, I'd love to get started here with our first question. So our first question is, what interested you to work in the health and life sciences industry? And what has been your experience so far, with a follow-up for advice that you'd like to give to students or early career professionals that are entering the same industry in similar roles? So I'll open that to our panelists, and feel free to jump in with an answer there.
I'll kick us off. I'll go. What interested me, so I'm Tracy Bacone. I sit on the health and life sciences industry team. My background is I first started in private practice and then moved through the med device space, and now sit on an industry subject matter expert team, really driving what the business needs. So where are the gaps, identifying those gaps, and then working across all segments of healthcare to make sure that we're supporting not only our customers, but also our partners, and then of course the patient population. I also lead accessibility for all of US health and life sciences, whether it's in the med device space or in the provider space. That's really what one of my passions are, which leads into how I got started in HLS. Just real quick, is when I was 8, and I just lost everybody. Okay, well, I'll be quick. When I was 8, my sister was born with the cord wrapped around her neck, and that cut off the oxygen, which then caused many, many, many health issues for her throughout her entire life. And as that 8-year-old child, I was exposed to this disparity in care and discrimination towards my family. My stepfather is a person of color. He's my sister's biological father. And it was really this experience, and then the following years of health inequity and discrimination, which has been the backbone of my passion and advocacy for the disability community, my passion around accessible technology, AI for accessibility, and then my work in health equity, really the intersection of disability, bias, and discrimination. And just to that second question, what I would say, this is what I tell every person that comes into Microsoft: we need your voice. We want your opinion. Don't be shy, be bold, be open. We want to hear from you to help us be better. So we're on this journey. There's not an endpoint to the journey, so we want to hear from you. Build a network of allies, find a mentor, be a mentor, and really find your passion. So my passion is around accessibility and accessible technology. Figure out how you can take that passion into your work every day. So I'll turn it over to my next colleague.
Well, I'll jump out there. My name is Jamal Dents. I'm an account director in HLS. I'll try to be pretty succinct to leave room for these other bright people, but what interested me candidly was the opportunity to make money. So I'm being very transparent with you. I'd heard this was an area to focus on to really accumulate a substantial amount of money. So that's what I went into this for. But as time grew, what I discovered is that I had a passion for helping to improve the lives of patients. At the end of the day, that person who's a patient could be me, it could be a family member. So to me, I feel pretty obligated and very honored and blessed to be able to work in a field where I can help impact care to change the lives of people. So that's important. My experience here at Microsoft and in general in this particular space has been very, very rewarding. And it's really a pleasure knowing daily my work, our work is going to leave this place better than we found it. In terms of advice, I'd say don't assume that there's a straight line to success. There will be a lot of zigs and zags. I'd say also be comfortable with change and challenges. Those are the things that help you grow. And then focus on developing a strong network of allies, mentors, sponsors, people that you can trust and lean on. And then lastly, always be willing to help others. I promise you, it will come back to you.
Hey Dory, I think you're muted. If I see your mouth moving, but nothing from you.
Yeah, I think we're having a bit of a sound issue.
I could jump in, Dr. Theo. Dory, are you with us?
Oh, we can hear you in, Dory.
Okay, go ahead, Dory.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. Dory Hicks, sales director based in Chicago. So I lead Microsoft's healthcare business in the upper Midwest. I cover multiple states from Western New York through Michigan, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota as well. So we'll deal with all of the major health systems in this neck of the woods. I actually started my career in the automotive industry. I'm a native Detroiter. I've been in Chicago now for about 12 years, but when I originally moved here back in 2006, it was right around the time that there was difficulties in and around the auto industry, and I was looking for, my next sort of phase of my career. And I looked at a number of different products across multiple industries, consumer products, and I landed in healthcare. I had an opportunity from a sales director at Novartis Pharmaceuticals who reached out to me as they were going through a launch of some new products. And that sort of started my journey. But in earnest, I think that my commitment to healthcare started back in 2015, 2016. I lost my mom to ovarian cancer, and I had traveled home to Detroit to help her prepare for that cancer. And I remember I was working with her throughout Sunday night, and we showed up at the hospital on Monday morning and got to the surgery suite. And the receptionist informed us that my mom's surgery had been canceled. And as a result of that, there were some issues with her blood work, and we had to delay that surgery. And I think that ultimately cost her some time as she fought that battle throughout most of 2016. So that really, for me, just resonated in terms of some of the disparate systems that we have across our healthcare ecosystem, and really the things that we can do to help not only cross-pollinate, but at the same time be able to sort of bring these different aspects of healthcare into a unified format, and we can leverage technology to do that. And I'm glad to be here at Microsoft, and I really love the way in which we have doubled and tripled down in this healthcare space. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Des.
Hey, thanks, Dory. And good afternoon, everybody. My name is Des Creary. I'm the health lead for Microsoft for the Americas. I've got the privilege of working with all the talented folks on the panel today, every day. It's truly a privilege. I've been at Microsoft for 3 years, but I grew up in the pharmaceutical industry. So I grew up in healthcare and then came to do health here at Microsoft. And what got me into health in general is I just wanted to help people. And I think that's a broad statement. And you can work in any number of industries to help people. I think my learning over time was you didn't have to be a doctor to help people in healthcare, that the healthcare system is so vast, not only in the US, but globally. And there are many ways that you can help. Engineers can help, payers help every day, tech companies help, staff. I could go down that line. Nurses, critically important. I could go down that line all day. But I got into healthcare ultimately to help. And the more I've been in it, I have been motivated by all of the people who join that fight every day. And so I would say you've heard folks talk about their personal experiences in healthcare. And I believe it takes a certain ethos to be successful here in healthcare. I think whether you personally connect to it because of something that's happened to a family member or a friend, or you just, as Jamal talked about, you get involved in healthcare and you become connected because you can't help yourself. My advice would be, as you're looking at career and you're looking at healthcare, is no matter what you choose something that you love. I was told this over 20 years ago, and I just thought it was cliche. I think if you asked each of us and you talked to us one-on-one, we would tell you work doesn't really feel like work. It's work, but it doesn't really feel like work because we're rewarded not just with the work that we do, but we have a unique opportunity to work with other people that we know at the beginning of the day they share our emotional connection to the work we do. So it's a double down on what we get to do every day. So again, I'll end with saying I have the privilege of working with folks who also have the same North Star as I do. I cannot overstate the value of that as you're choosing a path.
I'll go ahead and go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly Robke, and I'm the Chief Nursing Officer in the US for Microsoft. I've been in healthcare about 30 years now, and I'll be very honest with you, when I was trying to figure out my major in high school, I loved science, I loved working with people, and I loved chemistry as well. So that's what drove me into nursing. And it was really a balance of being able to work with people, being able to help people, but also my love and balance for science and chemistry. I'll echo what a lot of folks here have already said in terms of common denominators. I think know what your passions are, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be directly within your major. My love for chemistry drove me to math, and math drove me to the data. And while I worked in clinical positions for several years in Atlanta at Piedmont Hospital and in Houston at Memorial Hermann and MD Anderson Cancer Center, I found myself in research roles. And the data was really where my passion is. And I think that's really where my intersect with innovation came in. From there, like many of the other panelists, I worked in pharma and devices for a number of years, class 2 devices for pregnant women that were experiencing complications, also on IV pumps, but also on pharma and drug devices as well. And I've been looking at the questions, and I think one of the key themes that we'll touch on today here is how you can use data to really balance what the population looks like when you're doing research, when you're doing care improvements, so that it looks like the population that you serve. And you have to be very mindful and deliberate about how you engage with patient populations, and also the challenges and the knowledge needs of those patients over time as well. Going back to my career and touching on another question in terms of how I've progressed, I found myself actually in several technical positions along the way. I was an engineering project manager at Compaq, now HP, in the healthcare vertical, and also worked at Oracle. Prior to coming to Microsoft, I worked in the medication management group at Becton Dickinson on hardware devices that manage medication supplies, as well as the Alaris IV pump. But to one of your all's questions, I think being able to work at a technology company such as Microsoft really gives you a very unique and compelling opportunity to advance health across a number of continuums, to service patient populations beyond that of the individual point of care or even a single hospital. And the advancements and the opportunities and the innovations that we deliver really are impactful to lives across not just the US, but the world as well. And I think the last thing I'll say is it's very important to have mentors, because I have a number of engineering mentors that have been really helpful along the way. And I think another thing about healthcare that I would share is it takes a village. And while clinicians are an important part, we need engineers, we need the financial gurus, we need technology to really do the heavy work that needs to happen. And we've seen with the onset of the pandemic, but if you've been in healthcare, you know that a lot of these challenges have occurred for many years, and now is just an excellent opportunity. So I think, you know, technology really has a chance to move the needle, and there are so many roles to be filled in order to do this. And I'm glad to be here today. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. Tiffany, did you want to share very briefly? I can also move to the next question if you'd prefer a different set of questions.
No, sure. My name is Tiffany Shaw. I'm the business manager for the U.S. Health and Life Sciences space, getting to work with all these lovely folks here on the line with us today. I'll probably answer more of the second part of that question as I see it being reiterated through the Q&A in terms of how, you know, students can sort of stand out when they're looking to compete when you first graduate. I know it can be hard when you first get out of college and you see every JD that's asking for 10 years of experience, and you can't really get the experience without experience, right? So a lot of what we talk about is really making those opportunities for yourself. You know, you could volunteer, you can get engaged with different nonprofits, you could create a group within, you know, at your school or wherever you are, just showing that you've made some sort of effort to have a presence in the space where you can also sort of exert some of your industry knowledge or subject matter expertise in a particular space. So there are other options where you can get more creative if you don't necessarily want to go down the physician IT route, which we do have several of them here at Microsoft as well. But, you know, there are different options depending on what you want to pursue based on your passions.
Yeah, those are all really great answers, and I thank the panelists. There was a theme throughout around data and also what the future holds for care. I think it was mentioned several times that care could be improved if data was handled more appropriately within the space. So I wanted to ask this question, I think, of Desmond and Kelly, as I think these are a question in you all's area of expertise. But how does Microsoft Health and Life Sciences plan to create or even see the future impact of artificial intelligence, machine learning in healthcare innovation, specifically around some of the disparities and issues that you all have mentioned in your answers? So I guess I'll let Kelly, you can go first, and then maybe Desmond, you can talk a little bit more about AI at Microsoft.
Sure, this is a very exciting area, and it's rooted in data, but it's also in the signals that could be indicative of a need to act, of a need to respond, of a need to maybe even pivot into another direction. I really see AI throughout the continuum of care, and I'm looking at this as a clinician. The first and foremost opportunity that presents itself, and it's a necessity in my mind, is how we engage with patients. Patients are no longer really willing to sit back and passively accept care plans or even procedures. They want to be involved in care. They want to be able to communicate with their providers. And we've seen in the historical medical data that allowing for those channels of compliance and communication really help not only to improve the patient experience that we're all talking about, or even activating patients along the lines of increasing their knowledge of healthcare, of the necessity for compliance with care. But the first element I wanted to mention is AI informing how and when and why we engage with patients directly, or even, through a support line that could answer simplified questions and not require a resource burden, or immediately direct someone that's experiencing challenges to the right source, would be the first element I'd like to mention. A big one in healthcare is clinical and operational efficiencies. And I think we've been using a lot of data already in this area around how can we improve treatment regimens. I worked at MD Anderson for a number of years. We utilized a lot of data from labs, from tumor markers, from chemotherapy options, but being able to make those real-time changes. But let's keep in mind now, as care is advancing and as our population characteristics are changing, we have a lot of older folks entering healthcare and staying in the healthcare system for a while with the baby boomers. The second is around the number of Americans now experiencing chronic care conditions. 4 in 10 Americans have at least one chronic health condition, such as diabetes, such as hypertension. 1 in 10 Americans have more than one. And the way that they are impacting our health system, the way that we can manage their care, the way we can diminish adverse sequelae really is informed by AI as we start to get familiar with patient populations or segments over time. Third is analytics and how we go about that robust monitoring and searching for signals, like I mentioned previously, not only because these endeavors allow us to really inform how we treat certain patient populations, but it also helps us customize individualized care, which you'll hear us talk a lot, I think, about personalizing the care experience across each of these 3 buckets that I just mentioned. And the last thing that I want to mention is we have a challenge with AI as we are stewards of this technology, and that's to ensure that we're addressing any biases that result as an access to care. We're dealing with a certain, in certain instances, we may be dealing with patient populations that are self-stratifying, if you will, just because of barriers to access to care. We have to also make accommodations for those patients that may not enter into care initially, but also heavily influence the care decisions we might be making from data. And this is another instance of AI that I think will be of benefit and you'll hear a lot about going forward.
Thank you, Kelly. Desmond?
Yeah, well said, Kelly. I'm just add a few points. And I'm going to center in on disparities in care in my few points, saying that this issue is much bigger than I feel like we can do justice in this conversation. So I want to preface it by saying that. I think on the one hand, one thing that we can certainly do is continue to provide access to broadband. One of the things that the pandemic really brought to light was that folks have limited access to broadband. So when you want to provide a virtual care, which can exponentially increase access to care, but folks don't have basic broadband, they can't participate in the way that the industry is moving. So that's one. But if I were to, and that that prevents you from stepping into a lot of the things Kelly talked about, a lot of the benefits of AI before we even get started. So need to say that. But if I were to pick a spot, so if you think about clinical decision making and what AI does in terms of being able to mine data, reason over data, and then provide supplemental decision making signals to providers. I think this is a huge area where it comes to disparities of care. Why that's important is all of us have biases. All of us have unconscious biases. Providers are not immune by that because they wear a white coat. And so the ability to supplement decision-making, the ability to send signals to a provider while they're treating a patient is huge in terms of health disparities. Now that alone doesn't eliminate, it's part of certainly a bigger effort, but I think it helps. I also look at regions of the country where if you put a heat map down and you take a look at the South and the Southeast, southern states where you have a really high population of African-American folks in the country, the disparities there, no matter what the condition is, you call it diabetes, incidents of mistreatment of Black women with breast cancer, that part of the country is going to be super dark on the heat map. And so we have an opportunity to help identify earlier, catch crucial catches in cases like breast cancer. We have an opportunity to get ahead. AI allows us to detect certain diseases early, catch things that the human eye cannot catch. We've got many use cases like this. And so I think AI plays a crucial role, but I still think it has to sit alongside of human decision-making. And it has to supplement, and it alone won't fix the problem. And it alone in one part of the healthcare ecosystem won't fix the problem. So as we speak about AI, I just want to say it's got to be used across the healthcare continuum, across the ecosystem. I think that's a crucial role we play. I think we need to continue to play that kind of role. But whether it's the providers, whether it's the payers, whether it's the pharmaceutical company, med tech, I think we all can leverage AI in some way, shape, or form to go after issues that directly connect to disparities of care.
That's a great point, Des, and I'll just piggyback on that, the importance of, the people creating these technologies are also, training the software to have the same biases that they do, which is why it's so incredibly important that we have people of color and diverse people informing these systems to make sure that it isn't biased one way or the other. I mean, not in a great example, but if China's using facial recognition to track your whole life with just your face, right? And they're able to do that effectively because of who they have putting their technology together. Same thing with the US, and hopefully not in a terrible way, can be used for good. So we like to focus a lot on the ethics of AI and what we do with it and how that data is used.
Yeah, I think those are very good points around AI being a future innovation within this space. Something that Desmond just mentioned is that it's not only the technology and the innovation, it's also the interoperability between payers, providers, and pharmaceutical companies as well. So what is Microsoft Health and Life Sciences doing as far as innovations within that space to help those big players become closer connected so that we can actualize some of the changes that you all mentioned that help close those disparities? So what sort of interoperability innovations are available within you all's product suites there in health and life sciences?
I can start us off. So, very good question in and around this piece. And one of the things that we've introduced actually late last year was our Microsoft Cloud for Healthcare. And essentially, going back to what we talked about a little bit earlier with data being the core of enabling our ability to create what we would call a digital feedback loop. And so one of the objectives of Microsoft in going down the road is we're the first vertical in the organization to have a dedicated cloud. But the objectives were for us to enable personalized care, to improve operational outcomes, to reimagine healthcare and to empower care teams. And all of that really is at the center of that mission is data and AI. So we're able to take customer signals, employee input, whether it be in a provider space or in the pharma or the med tech space, product telemetry we look at, and also operational data to where we can aggregate that information and really have a one source platform by which we are able to convey that out to our customers and in the marketplace as well. And the other thing that we introduced as well is our API for FHIR, and that is something that allows us interoperability of healthcare data. So as you all know, there's multiple locations that health systems go to get data, whether it's imaging from a PACS software in that space, or whether it's results of testing where we use the EMR and some of the medical records technologically. Our Azure API for FHIR allows us to more readily digest that data flow. So we have multiple systems in which you actually generate data, but how do you ingest that data, and how do you take that data, use analytics, AI, insight, intelligence to enrich that data, and ultimately present that back out to the customer or to the end user themselves. So there are a number of things that we're looking that we actually are implementing in the marketplace today that look at the multiple areas in which we receive data in the healthcare space and how to best streamline that. And I know that the other panelists can probably comment on that as well.
I'll take a stab at it from a clinical side briefly. I think just following on and extending into the clinical environment, what Dory listed as some value attributes are several things. One, in terms of payers, if you look at some of our payer organizations across the country, they really have access to a rich and robust source of data across many patients, across many care institutions, and really can serve as a very formidable partner in terms of informing and collaborating on innovations. If we look at this from the lens of pharma, Microsoft has a number of partners that it's now working with on the pharma provider side, where we really look into the data deeply in terms of which patients in a certain patient population, whether it's at an individual facility, whether it's in a network of systems, are going to be most eligible for clinical trials. It's very competitive in a number of states around diabetes, around oncology, around heart disease, in terms of which patients are eligible, which patients are most likely to comply with and respond to treatment, and which patients, and honestly, it even extends to the benefit of the patients, where you might be able to identify 5 trials that fit a certain patient's profile. And this ties us back in to patient engagement. I think on the device side, there's a lot of good activities around this going on as well. But just touching on one of the elements Dory mentioned around the EMR, there's so much more data being generated now in healthcare beyond the EMR, and being able to offer interoperability is huge for the clinicians, for accuracy, for safety, but being able to offer that integrated experience across the continuum of care. Care isn't just going on in the hospital anymore. It's going on outside of the hospital, in urgent care centers and clinics, and being able to really access that data, that also lays on top of a patient's episode of care, from what clinicians were working on, what medications were given, what were their vital signs at the time certain elements were going on, really helps to drive progress in patient care. And it's exciting to be a part of. But I think the question really speaks to the necessity and the opportunity of expanding how we innovate in healthcare, and including our payer and our pharma partners in that endeavor going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to jump in briefly as we have over 25 questions, I believe, or 25 or so questions in the Q&A. So I want to make sure that everyone understands we won't get to all of those questions by the end of this innovation panel. However, I do want to begin to move into those questions, and I'll ask the panelists to try to keep it as brief as possible. I know that's a challenge given not only the nature of the questions, but also the nature of the business. So I'll ask that you all keep it brief, and maybe we can go through 5 or so of these 25 questions that have been voted as most interesting by the attendees. So with that, I'll move to a question from Dami, and this is about opportunities for new graduates within Microsoft, specifically the health and life sciences area of the business, looking at graduates with a background in biomedical engineering and biological sciences. So they want to know about that. And I'll add to that briefly, as I'm sure there are many different representations of engineering there at Microsoft. So are there any key areas that you all see those roles benefiting you in creating the impact that we've talked about today within your innovation group? And maybe I should pose that to either Des or Dory, potentially Jamal, as for that question.
Yeah, I'll just get us started really briefly and then kick it over.
Yeah.
There will never not be a need for engineers at Microsoft. And so consider this an invitation to apply and post. So though I'm laughing, I'm extremely serious. I think, you know, it's important that our engineering pipeline be strong. I said at the beginning of this that you don't have to be a doctor to help. I think one thing we would love to leave as an impression is in healthcare, we need talented engineers. Everything that the panel has been talking about so far is made possible by really talented engineers. And so we need those. I've been looking at the chat a bit, and I see another colleague of ours in the chat, Anne Marie, who is an engineer and works, is one of my colleagues. We work closely together. She went to Purdue, has an engineering background. And I know she's been really active in the chat. So Anne Marie, we appreciate it. I would say in terms of opportunities, there are many. I know this is about health and life sciences. Microsoft is a company built now on industry verticals. And so there are opportunities to come into Microsoft as an engineer, do many different things. And if your steer is health and life sciences, of course, we'd welcome you. But that's number one. Dory, Jamal, anybody really, please jump in. I just wanted to speak to that point.
Yeah, I'll jump in real briefly. I will say, just from my perspective, the more diversity we have in these sort of roles, the better. As we talked about AI and unconscious biases, all those things come into play when you have the same sort of people in the same room working on the same project. But when you add diversity, all of a sudden things seem to blossom and correct themselves, and different questions are being asked. So I would say that there's a place across the Microsoft ecosystem for engineers. But for me, the important part of that is bringing your diversity of thought and approach to the business. Dory?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, both Des and Jamal. And the other thing I'll say too is that, as Tiffany mentioned at the top of the call, Microsoft has been in healthcare for north of 3 decades. And in order for us to continue to evolve and to create next generation products and to meet the market where it's going directionally, engineering is going to be at the core of that. And whether you come from a biomedical background, a mechanical background, they all feed into the need for us to have, as Jamal mentioned, that diversity of thought and that diversity of expertise, because that will help inform the tools that we will put together to help meet the challenges of whatever the future brings. And I think that we've seen a tremendous acceleration in some of the implementation of our technologies as a result of COVID. We don't know what going back to normal is, because I don't think we'll go back to what we all lived in late 2019. I think at this point, we are really truly creating the future of healthcare. And the engineering piece to me is the lifeblood of what we do. I'm not an engineer by trade, but I am heavily reliant on the expertise of folks who sort of make our products happen. And so whether, as I mentioned, whether it be a mechanical background, electrical, chemical, biomedical, we will continue to double and triple down in this space. And there is plenty of opportunity here at Microsoft for you to, to find that niche specific to you. And once you're in the organization, branch out to whether the healthcare space or some of the other dynamics of our organization as well.
Sure. Tracy, go ahead and we'll move to the next question after.
So I just want to say real quick, when you're looking at Microsoft, our Xbox team has a healthcare lens. They have an accessibility and an AI healthcare lens. We use the Xbox for pain management with our HoloLens. We use the Xbox with autistic children to get them to teach them and educate them on how to code. So when we look at healthcare across Microsoft, it's not just in Dez's worldwide or our US side. It's actually across the board. So if you have a passion for gaming and Xbox, you can also be on the healthcare side too. So I just wanted to throw that out there. It's not at Microsoft, it's not linear for us. It's explosive.
That's a very good point, talking about the interconnectivity, the global nature of the business. So in speaking of that, there's a question from Toby Popula out of Nigeria. This individual developed a app called Live LDY, or Live Lady, I guess. And it's a means for people in Nigeria to talk with medical doctors. So they have a question related to how small companies that are developing these sort of solutions can reach out to Microsoft for collaboration. So is there any specific area within the business there at Microsoft where they should be communicating, or that takes in sort of and evaluates these ideas and technologies that come from the startup environment?
Yes. So there are a few, and I'm going to talk about one. If anybody else has a build, please do. But M12 is Microsoft's startup and incubation engine, and a great formal way in. Without knowing the depth of the app, what it does, I know what it does, but how it does it, and some of the background questions. It's hard for me to point it in a different direction, but it's M12. You can get to it online. I would encourage you to cruise over, take a look at the site, and you can interact with folks within M12 there.
Cool, thank you, Desmond. Let's keep moving along. We'll try to do it a bit more rapid fire so we can get through more of these questions. So I'll open this up. This is similar to a question we had before, but more so looking at it from the contribution standpoint and thinking, as a lot of you have had experience in multiple areas. So maybe this goes for one of you that have had experience in multiple industries. But looking at contributing to the healthcare industry specifically from a tech industry standpoint, as opposed to some of the other big players in the space with pharma, biotech, and med device. So can you speak a little to how those contributions are done within the healthcare industry from a tech industry standpoint? I think it was mentioned earlier, but if we could just highlight those a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. What I will say is that the unique thing about Microsoft, I actually came to Microsoft from an organization, the Abbott Labs. Before that was with GE Healthcare. So we were in the capital equipment, medical device type of space, very narrowly focused. Myself, Des, Kelly also have a background in pharma as well. And then I'll let Tracy comment, because I know she works on our industry team as well. But the one thing that I would say that's unique to Microsoft is that we have the opportunity to touch upon every aspect of healthcare. whether it be from a state and local government perspective, whether it be from a pharma perspective, med device, provider, payer. We get to touch on it all. And that allows us to be really solid, informed consultants for all of our customers. It allows us to have a perspective to the industry and a lens into the industry as we look at trends and the way in which we see the market moving. We sit in a unique position into where is that we don't necessarily focus in on one specific aspect of healthcare, but we can look at it from an all-up perspective and inform our customers based on some of the best practices and some of the things that we are doing across the industry in all of the different buckets that touch healthcare. And I'll open it up to my fellow colleagues to comment further.
Hey, I'll make a quick point because I love the question. I think, so I mentioned earlier, I grew up in pharmaceuticals. I loved it and think that the industry is particularly relevant now as it's been racing to create, manufacture, and then distribute COVID-19 vaccinations. And so I loved my work in pharma, and it is big work. But if you consider it in the scope of the healthcare ecosystem, it is one sub-vertical. The impact you can have at a place like Microsoft, if I take pharma as the example and what I did there, here we're focused on how can we improve manufacturing and supply chain? How can we improve R&D productivity? How can we help pharma companies get therapies to market faster? How can we help their interactions with the FDA and other compliance regulatory organizations be done in a more efficient manner? How can we improve their commercial cycles? And then how can we connect all of the pharma functions to each other in a very different way to help the whole operation run differently? And then how do we connect pharma to the other parts of the healthcare ecosystem who all have their subsegments who need to be connected and work together? And so we have the opportunity to take a look at a macro view and have a much larger, I would say, impact. We have to have a larger point of view. We have to understand the healthcare ecosystem in a very different way. And so working in those parts of the healthcare ecosystem are great, and you need to become an expert and get deep. Doing the roles that we do, you have to become a bit of a generalist, and you've got to know a lot and be able to spread it wide. And so the fun is different. The fun is a lot different. And so I'll just say that, but I love this question. And I think all of us come from these different walks, and I think we all can see the difference in terms of being specific and focused and then having to step out and become macro generalists. Just my 2 cents.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we only have time probably for about 2 to 3 more questions with a rapid fire answer style. So I appreciate those answers, and providing that context is very helpful, I think, for the audience here. One of the questions that is coming up, it's around the logistics of getting into Microsoft. And I'm gonna kind of spin 2 questions into one. So there are a lot of questions around not only how you get into the organization, but once you're there, how do you find the right mentor to kind of guide you through the ins and outs of that organization? So maybe I'll ask Tiffany to give a quick answer, as well as Tracy, as I see you've unmuted, on how you can get into Microsoft, as well as how you find that mentor in the organization that can support you.
Yeah, sure. So I think it really just all starts, with your network. You start out with your own team and your manager who and advising, making it known that you're interested in learning about a, certain space, or looking for someone that can help advise you on a certain area. And then they connect you with different people, and then sort of this ongoing tree. And then as you form those relationships and they change roles in the company, you've now formed a new relationship with someone in a different team that you get exposure to too. So a lot of opportunities will come up from, hey, I came to this new team, or hey, I heard about that team, want to reach out to you about that. But reaching out and having that symbiotic relationship. So it's not just, hey, give me advice. It's also, hey, I can give you a unique perspective as someone who's new to the company, from an engineering background, from someone who has deep experience in the life sciences space. Just know your value, what you have to offer too. And I think will really help with mentorship opportunities.
So I'll just dive in real quick because to be rapid fire. So first, use LinkedIn. Use your social network. Get your LinkedIn page. That is your digital profile today in this day and age. Reach out to people, build your network that way. Then when you get into the company, we have employee resource groups. We have mentor programs. You can invest in all of those programs. They're available to everybody. We have 13 employee resource groups, maybe you call them impact groups, but get into those groups. They are a wealth of knowledge. They've been around for a really long time. We're continuing to build them out. So use your network, LinkedIn, to get connected with people. Connect with all of us that are on this panel, connect with us, and then your network explodes. And then when you're in the company, get into your resource groups. And that's true of any company you go to. Get into your resource groups. They provide that mentorship level, the support level, the friendship, the connection.
Theo, briefly, I'll just mention another cool way to get involved and engaged in some collaboration opportunities we have going on at Microsoft is coming up in May. We run a Nurses Hack for Health in partnership with Sansil and Johnson & Johnson. It's a great way to get involved in key areas of health where innovation is desperately needed. And we are looking for engineers to help in this endeavor. We feel it takes a village. We want interprofessional disciplinary approaches. That's going to be held May 14th through the 16th. And I'll make sure this organization has information about how to learn more and how to participate. But it's a great opportunity to work side by side with Microsoft engineers and see what our organization is about and contribute to a really cool.
Sure, that sounds wonderful. I think you all provided a lot of strategy around not only how to get into Microsoft, but also what to do once you get there. The last question I want to answer, as we still have to close, and I just want to make sure that we give enough time for some of those activities. The last question I want to answer goes back to something that Tracy said around technologies outside of the health and life sciences group that are still engaging in healthcare. One of those mentioned was the Xbox, and you mentioned its utilization with children with autism. There's a question that came up around how Microsoft is developing neurotechnology for brain-machine interfaces. And they want to look specifically at the assistance that you all are providing for individuals with developmental disorders like autism or hearing loss, cerebral palsy, and others. So do you have any information there and how those data and analytics are kind of feeding the treatment, diagnosis, and care of these patients?
So if you don't mind, I'm going to go a different route, but I'll be quick,
Okay.
I promise. Okay, so what Microsoft discovered about 10 years ago was that the normal hiring process for people with autism was disastrous. It's a terrible hiring system and process with the interviews that are standard. It just doesn't work. So we actually developed, with multiple organizations that have expertise in the autism world, an autism hiring program. And the interviews are totally different. Because here's the thing, everybody has something to contribute, and it's our job to open the doors for everybody to have that way. So at this point, I mean, I'll tell you a story. I have a colleague that had interviewed multiple times to get into Microsoft and never made it past maybe the first or the second or the third interview. When they created this autism hiring program, he was one of the first people hired into the company. PhD in number theory, brilliant, but that standard hiring system is just does not work for some of our communities. So all of our technology has accessibility built in. So if you have hearing loss or hearing impairment, all of our technologies through Teams, through our Office products have accessible technologies built in, whether it's closed captioning, whether it's blur background. All of those technologies were actually created with our disability community in mind, but have modern applications that we use every single day. So specifically at the beginning of that question, that I think it was Syed who asked, we're not in that world because that's a surgical world, but for the neurodiversity, we work a lot with ALS, with using the Tobii eye tracker so that people still can communicate with their literally communicate, work their wheelchairs, and participate in life. We're right now in our research and development, we're updating the white cane for the blind community and actually using AI and GPS sensors so that they have, we're updating the white cane. I mean, it's 200 years old and there's been no updates to that. So it's a really cool where you can bring in technology to an existing system or an existing tool and update it for today. So there's lots and lots of work going on. I think I answered the question in a roundabout way, but I mean, certainly I'm open if anybody wants to connect and have a deeper conversation.
Yeah, I think that was a very good answer. I don't know, we have about a minute or so left of our question and answer period. Did anyone else want to add to that answer around technology for the neurodiverse community specifically?
I would just say, because we are a partner-led organization, which is another conversation for another day, you know, we get so much done through our partners. Much of our work is actually showing up alongside of or empowering the work of the partners in that space. And so what Tracy just talked about is a great example of things that we're doing first party, which we try to very much do. I think to expand our reach here and in other places, our best work, some of our best work is through partners as well. So to take then another way to it, as Tracy said, if you go and take a look at some of the organizations you might be familiar with in that area, take a deeper look in what technology companies they're using to enable and empower their ambitions. And many times you'll see us there, you'll definitely see the industry there, one way or the other.
Very nice. Excellent. So at this stage, because we only have 5 minutes left and there are a couple of housekeeping items, I regretfully would like to close the Q&A portion. I really appreciate not only the questions from the attendees, but also the answers and the multivariate nature of the work that's going on at Microsoft. So thank you to each of the panelists for their contributions to today. Thank you to the attendees as well. I'm just going to quickly and briefly share a couple of upcoming elements for our group here within HiSig, and then close the program. So thank you again to all of you for joining. Thank you again to the panelists. Very briefly, this is the HiSig leadership team where you can connect with us via the email. Is just healthcaresig@nsbe.org, and you can quickly connect with us. I want to quickly invite all of you to the HiSig and PISig industry networking mixer that's brought to you by Carrier. It will be taking place tomorrow, Wednesday, April 7th at 8:15 p.m. Eastern Time. It's located within George Smith Hall, Main Hall, on the rooftop, and it's featuring DJ Andre Mack. And so with that, I will close our program for today. Thank you everyone for joining us. This program will be available as it is recorded, so you can always go back and we'll work to get some answers from you, for you all from the Q&A portion so that you all can have that accessibility. So with that, I will pause my sharing. Again, thank you so much for everyone that attended, and have a great rest of your afternoon, and see you all at the networking mixer tomorrow at 8:15 p.m. Thank you.
Still got 42 long.